passing bells for these who die as cattle. Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers, no bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all, not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmer of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds.
One of the most important things you can do when analysing a poem is look at the title, because often the title will give you an idea as to what this poet is trying to say before you've even read the poem. What you need to do is write down the title in your books with enough space above and below to make notes, to annotate. So what we'll do is we'll look at each word one by one. So the first word, anthem. Your first job is to write down around that word anthem, above it, below it, to the side, any associations in your mind with that word. So when you hear an anthem, if you've ever sung an anthem, what kind of situations do you associate with an anthem? Where would you normally hear one? Where might you sing one? So jot down some ideas about the word anthem. Once you've done this, you might want to jot down some potential emotions or moods that you might associate with an anthem. So when people sing anthems, what's the general feeling if you were to think about those situations or events when you might sing an anthem? What kind of emotion drives the singing? Once you've made your notes on the word anthem, have a look at the last two words, doomed youth. So first of all, I want you to think about what technique is used there. Doomed youth. You have two words put together that shouldn't really be in the same sentence, let alone right next to each other, simply because of the connotations of both. So if we look at the word doomed, around that word, above and below, again, write down some ideas that you think of when you hear the word doomed. What do you associate with that word? Are there any synonyms that you can think of, words that mean the same sort of thing? Are there any antonyms that you can think of, words that would mean the opposite? What would it mean to be not doomed? Just make some notes on that. And then finally, the word youth. Again, above, below, to the side. Make some notes for yourself on the associations in your mind with the word youth, connotations of that word, synonyms again, antonyms. Explore all the corners of your mind for those three words. Once you've done this, I want you to ask yourself the question, what does this title imply about Wilfred Owen's feelings towards war? What must or what might this poet have felt about war? If he's writing a poem called Anthem for Doomed Youth. What might Wilfred Owen have felt about war? Write yourself a short paragraph underneath the title with your annotations. You could begin it with something like, from analysing the title, or on looking at the title, Wilfred Owen seems to feel, and then explain what you think. Now what we can do is look at each line, and with Wilfred Owen poems you really can go line by line, and you could write a paragraph on each line because his poetry is so full of imagery and emotion. So the first line, the opening line of this poem, asks us a question. And the question is, what passing bells for these who die as cattle? What I'd like you to do for this line is have a think about the metaphor that's used there. These men, these boys, are compared to cattle. They die as cattle. What associations do you have with cattle and dying as cattle? What kind of words would we use to describe that sort of death? Once you've thought about the connotations of that image, write yourself a short paragraph that explores the use of that metaphor by Owen, and explain what impression we are given of the conditions at war by the use of that phrase, for these who die as cattle. What impression are we given of the conditions at war? Wilfred Owen answers his own question, and those of you who have got good memories from Animal Farm, you should know what technique that is. So when you ask a question and then you answer it immediately afterwards. But the answer he gives is really emotive. A very powerful description, because the passing bells that these men, these boys, get are simply the noises around them on the battlefield, only the monstrous anger of the guns. That's all they hear. There are no passing bells, only the monstrous anger of the guns. That line in particular, you've got another use of a particular technique that's been used there to describe the sound of the guns. So your next task is to identify what technique Wilfred Owen has used there to describe the guns. What technique has he used with monstrous anger? And you need to explain, in your short paragraph, explain why you think Owen has decided to use that particular technique at this point. Why has Owen decided to use that technique in describing the monstrous anger of the guns? In this line, Owen gives us more information about the guns, the monstrous anger of the guns. And he writes, "Only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons." Orisons is the word used to describe prayers. Orisons are prayers. So only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. There are two things I'd like you to think about in this line. Firstly, the technique that Owen has used with the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out. What technique has he used there? Stuttering rifle's rapid rattle, pattering out their prayers. There are a couple that you might identify. And again, what I need you to do is identify what technique is used, but explain why. What effect does that have on us as a reader? What effect does that have Why has Owen decided to use those techniques when he's describing the sounds that the soldiers can hear? Once you've written up your thoughts on that, I'd like you to have a think about the adjective that describes the prayers, that describes the orisons. What effect does the addition of that word have on the reader? The word hasty. What effect does that have on us? In this line, Owen writes, "No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning, save the choirs." Here, this word mockeries, if you mock somebody, it means that you sneer at them. You might be sarcastic, you're joking at their expense if you mock somebody. So when Owen talks about mockeries, he's making a reference to funerals and to funeral traditions and the things that would normally happen, and he calls them mockeries. Why do you think that Owen feels that funerals or celebration of death, recognition of death, why does he call that a mockery, do you think? So that's the first thing I'd like you to explain in a short paragraph. And then I'd like you to think about what he does here with his punctuation. And in order to do that, we need to have a look at the next line. So we have no mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, comma, dash. The shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. So here are the choirs that these boys can hear. This particular couple of lines are really powerful in terms of the effect on us as readers. And what you need to do, that first line in particular, is really explore each of these words in turn. First of all, the word shrill. Think about sounds that you associate with shrillness. A shrill sound, what does it do to you physically when you hear a shrill noise? Think about the word demented. If something is described as demented, have a look on Etym Online to see what that word literally means. If you are demented, it's associated with dementia. Have a look at what the word actually means, and then apply that word to these wailing shells being the bombs falling from the sky. And it's not a singular bomb, these are choirs of wailing shells. The sky is full of these shrill, demented, wailing choirs. What effect does that have on us as humans? What does that make you feel about the soldiers? What does it make you feel and understand and appreciate about war, about the conditions in World War I? And then look what Owen does. He goes from that sound, that very specific, horrific sound, to the sound of the bugles calling for them from sad shires. So the shires, the towns that they left behind, the counties that have lost so many of their boys, so many of their brothers and fathers and sons. And the sound of the bugles that you heard at the beginning of this video. A bugle has a really specific, soft, rich, melancholy sound. But alongside the shrill sound of these shells, it's such a potent, such a powerful description that Owen gives here. I want you to really explain, really think try and hear what he wants us to hear, and try and explain in as much rich detail as you can what this does to you as a person. Now Owen asks us another question, and he asks what candles may be held to speed them all. Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. So here we have another reference to a funeral, and rather than candles being held to help these men on their way to the afterlife, to remember them, to bring them into the minds of the people at home, rather than candles, you have only the glimmers in the eyes of boys as they cry. And this might be the boys at home, it might be the boys, the men themselves on the battlefield. The only glimmering, the only shining is the glimmer in their eyes. And have a think about why else you might describe someone's eyes as being shiny or glassy or glimmering. Again, write up your thoughts. How do you feel after these lines? What do you think Owen wanted us to feel? What do you think he wanted us to consider? Continuing this comparison with the funeral, with the mockery that he calls a funeral, Owen says, the pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. The pall is the cloth that's put over the coffin. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. Their flowers, the tenderness of patient minds. So here, what will be rested over these men who won't be in coffins, the cloth that may rest over them will be the paleness of girls' brows, the paleness of the brows of the faces of the women at home who were left behind, of the wives, the girlfriends, the sisters, the mothers, the daughters. That soft paleness is what will lay over them, metaphorically. And their flowers, the flowers that these men receive, will be metaphorical also. They will be the tenderness of patient minds. So this idea of people waiting at home, patient waiting, patient minds that sit and wait by the window, thinking about these men, thinking about these boys, and the thoughts that grow in those minds, the thoughts that bloom, they're the flowers that these men will receive. And then following that, the memories. Once the telegrams are received by the families, once the passing bells are rung in the villages, the flowers that they have forevermore will be the memories that bloom in the minds of those who remain. What do you think Owen wanted to suggest by using these two images? What do you think he wanted to achieve? What has he done in terms of perspective here? Whose perspective might we be thinking from at this point? In the final line, Owen writes, and each slow dusk, a drawing down of blinds. So the drawing down of blinds would have happened if you and your family received notice of someone who had passed. It was tradition to draw down the blinds. You would pull down the blinds so that, first of all, people in the village, in the surrounding streets would know. They would be aware that you'd lost somebody. Therefore, they might not They would know perhaps not to bother you, or equally they might think they might drop round some food at some point. And at the same time, it allows the people in the house to have a sense of privacy, a sense of quiet, and a period of mourning. But what Owen's saying here is that these men, they don't have the funeral, they don't have the flowers, they don't have the choirs, they don't have the candles, they don't have the pall. What they have is just the ending of the day. Each slow dusk, the day draws to a close, and more lives draw to a close at the end of each day. That's the drawing down of the blinds. And the question here is, that's a really powerful image. The question here is, what might Owen be trying to suggest about the nature of war, about nature itself, about humanity? What might Owen be trying to tell us, trying to imply about nature, war, and humanity?